Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of what we hope will be a series of practical cyber simulator webinars that will help you to get the most out of our crisis simulator. In today's session, Ben will give you a first glimpse at some of the exciting developments that the team have been working on, including a new series of scenarios that will help you manage attacks against your information and operational technology. Then next up, Charlotte and Rob will give you a very quick practical demo on how and show you just how easy it is to set up your next crisis sim so that you can start exercising your team straight away. We want this session to be as useful and interactive as possible, so the whole team will be available to answer any questions you might have. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question prior to today, but if you didn't have a chance, please feel free to use the chat function or by unmuting yourself when invited. Yeah, that's right. We've taken the risky move on this one to allow the audience to unmute, so please be careful and keep it respectful. Please also be aware that this session is being recorded and will be distributed shortly afterwards. This is a live session in which we'll be switching between presenters and we'll be switching between presentations and between our platform. So please bear with us as we kind of handle the the technical side of things. Also, finally, we're aware that it's really easy for you to log out of this presentation software. So if that happens, please don't worry, just reconnect using the same link that you used to get here in the first place. Before we launch into all that, I just want to take a moment to introduce the team who will be speaking to you today. My name's Kieran. I'm the head of customer success in EMEA for Immersive Labs, and it's my team who are responsible for helping you, our customers, get as much value as possible out of our products, obviously including Crisis Sim. Stuart is our Senior Director of Global Alliances, and he's the brains behind the recent CMORG cyber exercise, which I believe many of you were on, and helped many UK financial institutions improve their operational resilience and prepare for new FCA regulations. Charlotte is our Crisis Sim content researcher and the lead author of the new scenario that we'll be demonstrating to you today on this webinar. She creates internal content for the Crisis Simulator and works with external clients to deliver quality Crisis Sim training scenarios. Rob is a content specialist and is also responsible for internal and external content development, specializing in gamification, dynamic decision trees, and content engagement. And last but not least, Ben is our crisis management and response subject matter expert and Crisis Simulator content lead. That's a mouthful. Prior to joining Immersive Labs, Ben spent over 15 years in major incident and crisis management, from cyber and missing persons to mass casualty events, including terrorist attacks and natural disasters. It's a real pleasure for me to be joined by such an experienced team today, and I hope it's going to be a valuable experience, a valuable session for everyone. Now I'll pass over to Ben, who is going to talk about some of the exciting new scenarios that we're developing.
Kieran, thank you for that. Can I just very quickly check you can all hear me okay? Quick thumbs up, be good. Thank you. So as you all know, and before we get into the meat of today's scenario, I think we can all agree, particularly in the roles that you're in, 2021 has been an incredibly busy year in the cyber world. And I think one of the big things we've seen this year is a shift in terms of that highlight of collateral damage, collateral operational damage following attacks against IT networks. And I think we saw that right at the start of the year with the attack on Colonial Pipeline in the US, but we've also seen it with the attacks, the attack against Kaseya, the attack against the Oldsmar water facility in Florida as well, just to name a few. I think whether we're looking at this IT-OT risk convergence or whether we're looking at a major financial institution's operational resilience being threatened by a severe cyber attack, we believe that really the best and only way of really effectively preparing for these events, which are obviously likely to continue, is frequent, accessible scenario drilling, scenario testing and micro drilling. And as we're about to experience with the Crisis Simulator, Basically, what we've got is essentially a choose your own adventure crisis decision-making tool. So you can use this to practice and enhance your decision-making skills in what's hopefully as close to and as accessible a realistic environment as possible. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to our two facilitators for the day. So we've got Charlotte, who authored this particular scenario, and we've got Rob as well, both core members of the Crisis Simulator team. So without further ado, over to you guys and enjoy the facilitation.
Perfect. So as Kieran said, firstly, we're going to show you just how easy it is to set up a scenario for your team to allow them to play it. So this is the Crisis tab in the platform. Hopefully some of you will have already seen it. I just select Setup here. And then you'll see we've got 3 different exercise types. We've got single player. So that's if you want to do an asynchronous scenario, you can assign it to different teams. It will be sent out to them to complete. You can set a deadline and then you can send it to them to complete in their own time before that deadline. Then we've got drills. So this is a scenario in which multiple people can play one scenario together. So there'll be different roles assigned to different choices, and then each person will make their choice and it will sort of hand off to the next member of the team. So the person before you's choices will affect what you get next. And then we've got the type of scenario we'll be running through today. So that's presentation. So this is where I can ask the audience, I will facilitate it for you, and you can make choices that will affect the scenario. So I select here. You'll see we've got 2 different versions of the scenario in our platform. So we've got this one, which is the AMA launch, which we're using today. So it's a truncated version of this scenario here. So we encourage you to go away and play the full one after the session. But for today, we'll run you through this one. I don't want to set a deadline for it. I can change any of the numbers or the wording here, but I won't. And then I confirm and publish, and we're ready to play. So if I start the exercise, press play. If you go to this URL that you see at the top, play.immersivelabs.online, I think someone might be able to pop that in the chat for me as well, and use this code 260902, you'll be able to log in to our companion app, and then you'll be able to play along with the scenario with me. So I will start the exercise. You can do that at any point during the scenario. But yeah, if you just want to go to that URL and pop in that code. So as Ben mentioned, the scenario we're walking you through today is part of a new series of content that we're releasing, which is based around IT/OT technology. So it draws on CISA's guidance around threats to critical infrastructure, and it also draws on some real life examples that we've seen throughout this year. So this particular scenario draws heavily on the hacking of a water treatment facility in Oldsmar, Florida. So in this scenario, we are an incident manager who works for a water treatment plant in Michigan, so a city of 15,000. We've had a CISA alert that there may be a danger of us being under attack from hostile states following attempts on other facilities around us. We're also currently running a bare bones operation due to high costs and low funding for our facility. And as a result of that, security has just not been a top priority for a number of months. So there's potentially a weakness there. We've also been dealing with water shortages and the effects of the pandemic, which has moved us to remote working. So we've been using TeamViewer, which is a software that you can use to log in remotely, but which does open up our technology to dangers from more attack surfaces. And like I said, the scenario was developed based on the growing number of reports of threats to the US water system. I will mention that although it's heavily focused on IT/OT, the learning objectives that are set out in the scenario are applicable across industries. So this is actually the first series that we're doing that has got lab content. So if you're a lab license holder, there is a lab series that will also accompany this Crisis Sim series. So the first lab is Crisis Management 101, and it will teach you the difference between incidents and crises and why that matters. So that will come up during the scenario. So what I will do now is I will move on to Inject 1. So we've received an alert from a colleague. They've noticed their computer mouse moving of its own accord on their screen while presenting a webinar. Initially, they assumed it was the action of a supervisor, but it happened again. And what the mouse was doing was trying to raise the levels of lye in your water 100-fold. So they verified the movement was not down to a supervisor and escalated the incident to us in accordance with established escalation protocols. And we've got a video here of the suspicious mouse movement. Sadly, this software doesn't allow you to hear Rob's beautiful voice doing the acting, but again, we encourage you to play it afterwards, so you'll be able to hear it then. I will now reveal the options, and you should be able to vote. So we've got 6 participants. I think there's maybe a few more people present. So if you want to go to that URL at the top, feel free. But whilst we're letting you vote or log in, if you've not managed to do that yet, I'll just go to Rob, and we're going to talk about options. So we've got 4 options here, Rob. Obviously, there's sort of infinite options that you could choose when dealing with a situation such as this. Why have we gotten for this sort of prescriptive kind of option basis? What's the ethos around that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really glad that people don't have to hear my fabulous voice acting, but you're going to hear my voice now, and it's an awesome question, Charlotte. Thank you very much. So why we choose options and why we use those throughout the scenario? Well, when you're on a traditional tabletop exercise, usually you're going to be posing a couple of different discussion questions, and we still encourage that. This is where the facilitator gets full control when they're going to reveal these options. So you can still encourage that part of the discussion. But this being a dynamic scenario, there are a couple of reasons. So first of all, we wanted to sort of provide a more granular approach to how we would sort of approach these injects. And so whereas normally we might have one inject and present a bunch of different discussion questions, we might break those down into individual injects. A second element of that is that it actually forces more discussion. It's really interesting to get people to make a decision of the available options there, and then have a further discussion point afterwards on sort of the pros and cons, and getting a bit of disagreement and sort of getting different perspectives. Another key element is I mentioned that it is a dynamic scenario. So by choosing one of these options, this will influence how the scenario plays out, what injects you might be presented, what options might be available in those injects. And so it allows us to track that as we go through. And finally, of course, this being a sort of a platform offering, we collect metrics throughout these scenarios, and that is something that is sort of encouraged and sort of enabled by allowing people to sort of select one of these options as we run through.
Perfect, thanks, Rob. So we've got 10 participants, but 3 responses. So I'm going to reveal them, and we'll click through the majority here, but if you do want to vote next time. So we've gone for beginning mitigation procedures, and then we can see the impact of this. So we've got a ranking of a good answer, and we see our graphs have gone down. And again, each of the actions is essential. So as Rob was kind of saying, it's not about one being necessarily the right, like the only good option or like the only thing that can be done, but it's about timing in this case. So even though all the actions we presented to you are essential, the priority at this point should be assessing the scope of the compromise and isolating any affected systems. So that's a lesson that is applicable across any industry, not just IT/OT. But we've also got some more specific information that will be helpful for anyone that works in this kind of industry. So an EPA piece of documentation guidance, and again, a CISA statement that has more guidance as well. So click through to the next one. So we decided to find out how our system was accessed. It transpires that some company data has been leaked, and of credentials for TeamViewer. The threat actor was able to use the credentials to get into the system and then access supervisory control and data acquisition systems. All of our computers have got the same password for remote access, and they're directly connected to the internet without any type of firewall protection installed. So in this instance, we've got a binary choice for you here. How are we classifying the situation? Is it an incident or is it a crisis? So again, I'll open up the voting to the participants, and if you want to vote on which one of those you think is right. And whilst we let you vote, I'll just throw it over to Ben and ask him, why is it important to assess this?
Good question, Charlotte. I think if you mean assessing the context of whether it's an incident or a crisis, I think that's probably most obviously important in terms of it. It probably immediately determines how quickly you're going to respond and who you're going to tell about it. Those are probably the most kind of critical aspects of having that preconceived escalation definition criteria in place. I'm interested to see how the audience defines it based on the information so far.
Yep. We can reveal the responses now. And 50-50, so as quite a split. So obviously I know the right answer, so I'm gonna go with incident. And like I said, we do have a lab that in the full version of this comes in the first inject, which will teach you about the differences between incident and crises. So we're really kind of enhancing that soft skill of those decision-making capabilities of the player. So we've got a great answer. At this point in time, it appears the issue has been remediated. You know the cause of the breach and reparations are in process. So at the moment, it's not escalated to the point of a crisis yet. We'll continue on. So a month passes and a number of citizens in your municipality are affected by a bizarre illness. Victims are vomiting blood, have severe stomach pain, and are experiencing digestive issues. And you've got people from a 2-year-old child to elderly citizens all being affected. So eventually, doctors are able to figure out that they have acute lye poisoning. So that's what the issue is. Further investigative work reveals that lye levels in your water have been changed. So it seems that a sophisticated attacker has managed to bypass further safety procedures following the initial incident a month ago. And in spite of your recommendations to do so, not all passwords were changed. So they were able to access your network and OT systems and very slowly sit in your system, testing your responsiveness and bypassing your failsafe, making citizens sick. So at this point in the scenario, we're asking you to tell us what your primary concern is. So we've got public health, the environment, reputation, or legal requirements. So I'll open voting now. And whilst you vote again, Rob, what are we looking to achieve by making this assessment? What's the point of this? How does it help us?
Well, it's a really interesting sort of perspective at this point in the incident, as we've seen so far, to sort of outline where our priorities lie. Now, hopefully these have been outlined before we reach the point of an incident or a crisis, so what we're looking to sort of achieve by doing this is we're faced with a lot of wicked problems when it comes to crisis management, problems that don't necessarily have a solution, and problems that might actually benefit one part of a business or of a sort of area of concern, but actually cause a bit of a detriment to another. What we're trying to do when we outline this is it's sort of ultimately going to be unifying our approach to this decision making throughout, unifying those resources and assets when we need them, but also it's ultimately going to act as some scales for us, so that when we do get presented with a wicked problem that ultimately sort of pitches public health versus environment, we know which one we should be leaning more towards. How this could sort of this decision at this point could affect the rest of the scenario. Well, being a dynamic scenario, we do this quite often in our catalog scenarios, and you can do this as well in the builder. It might be at this point, if we say, for example, didn't choose public health as our priority, then later down the line, we will present participants with an inject that means because we didn't present that as a priority, we didn't assign more assets, we didn't keep a closer eye on it, and that meant more people got sick and maybe even more things happened. And we could reflect that in any one of these. So it's ultimately a way for us to, start to sort of seed the decisions that people make and really bring home the learning of outlining this key point.
And again, I guess this is another good example of how a question can be specific to a situation, as in the kind of the situation we've outlined in this specific scenario, but it's also useful learning across a broader range of industries, etc., because it's a question that might come up regardless of whether you're an OT company. So I'll reveal the responses for this one. And we've got public health as the primary one. So that is the great answer here. It should be your primary concern. You need to concentrate on ensuring no more people get sick. Active ill citizens has the most far-reaching consequences and could prove to be the most costly in the long run. So that is a good question as well to have a discussion around. So if you were running it with a group of people where you were in one place or you wanted to talk a lot, that's a good question where we did this as a team and it elicited quite a lot of different perspectives, which are interesting to consider. So now we've moved on to a comms kind of question. So news of the water contamination is picked up by the press. They are concentrating on your response to the earlier incident and failure to strengthen your cybersecurity posture. They have insider information claiming that insecure passwords weren't changed and no firewalls were installed. So how are we going to respond to this? We've got a first option of internal action. So someone has obviously leaked this to the press. We need to get that in order before we can even consider formulating a press strategy. We've got a holding statement, so we can be very generic, and we are aware of the incident and we'll have more information following an investigation. We've got a reassuring statement. We are working on remediating the issue and relevant parties have been informed. There is no further cause for concern or full transparency. So do you want to provide all the information you have to the press and invite them to talk to key members of your team? And I'll open the voting. So again, you'll be able to choose which option you think is best. And then I'll throw it over to Ben just to ask him about what considerations we might have when transmitting effective public communications and how that's applicable, whatever company you're at.
Good question, Charlotte. It's a very big question. I'll try and answer it as briefly as I possibly can and try and step away from this scenario a bit, because there's obviously a huge public health issue going on, which I think would massively determine and should massively determine your communication and some of the principles behind that. I'll just make a few points that I think are salient from the last year in the cyber world. I think in terms of communication, always understanding your stakeholders before a crisis as well as during a crisis is vital, and the more you can do before a crisis, the better, and that will help you inform who you're telling when, what you're telling. But I think there's some general principles that have become really prevalent in the last year. I think the expectation on of full transparency has increased. The expectation for that transparency to happen a lot quicker has increased. I think it's always vital for organisations to get ahead of the curve and fill any kind of information gap by being as transparent as possible, as early as possible. And I think particularly with some of the cyber attacks we've seen in the last year, that expectation is even more vital, it's even more critical, because that information being shared during the early phases of an attack can actually help others defend against it. I think we've seen that on a number of occasions in the last year. So there's a lot more I can say, but yeah, conscious of time.
Okay, I'll just reveal the responses. So we've got holding statement had quite a lot, but full transparency was the most popular option. And that is a great answer. As Ben was saying, that's something that we've seen as a trend across sort of who gets praised for their response to a cybersecurity incident, who doesn't. So it seems that full transparency plays best reputationally. So that's kind of an insight into the research we do when building a scenario, is that we take this holistic view of what's happening in the industry, and we try and look at lessons that we can glean from big cyber events and kind of distill them down for you. In the feedback here, you might notice it says your previous decision about how triumphant to be in communicating your response to the initial breach may come back to haunt you here. So because this is a truncated version of the full scenario, just in the interest of time, there is actually an earlier comms question in the full-length scenario, as this is called further comms, which would allow you to either be really positive about how you dealt with the initial incident, or kind of more cautious, and whichever route you take there will affect this answer coming down here. So I've played it as though we've been really praising of our own answer early on, but just an example of some of the dynamism that we can build into the scenarios as well. So now we're on the last one of this small version of the scenario, and it is what we call a hot wash. So the media furore dies down and you implement mandated updates to ensure an incident like this cannot happen again. You check this time that staff change their passwords and add additional firewalls to protect OT systems. Money is still tight, so you have to prioritize accordingly. You're now moving into a post-crisis evaluation stage. So what is the biggest lesson you take away from this whole situation that we've just gone through? Do you want to ensure remediation efforts are fully implemented after an incident? Do you want to take away the lesson to not get complacent, because determined attackers will always find a way into your system? Do you want to take away the lesson that you should communicate your communication strategy carefully to ensure that you use the right tone in order to set yourself up for future failure? Or do you want to take away the lesson that you should strengthen your OT security posture, and that even with a tight budget, cybersecurity measures are one of the most valuable assets to your company? And I just want to point out that the question is the biggest lesson to take away from this, because obviously these all are very important. So I will open the voting, and whilst we vote, I'll just throw it over to Rob to talk about the value in this kind of question at the end of a scenario, or why we use a hot wash in a lot of our internal scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we've been facilitating these, and when we've seen many of our sort of clients using hot washes, they will potentially have a sort of post analysis after the facilitation. We also like to usually include some element of a hot wash question right at the end of the scenario, for a few reasons. One, it's an excellent point of discussion, having gone through the full scenario and understanding the decisions that were made and how you might have reached to this point. This hot wash, based off the fact that it's a dynamic scenario, might be different depending on what you've chosen throughout. So that's an interesting discussion point. But one of the key things is that whenever we create a scenario and a sort of tabletop exercise, we've always outlined some key learning objectives that we ultimately want our participants to take home, the take-home message. When we get to the end of the scenario, we like to give our participants the opportunity to sort of see whether the outcomes of their experience align with the learning objectives that we've created. So at this point, it's a really interesting point for the participants, but it's also a really interesting metric for us to gather as authors and as organizations running tabletop exercises, to see ultimately what is the message that they're taking home from the scenario that we've created or if you create in the content builder.
Perfect. Yes, it's a bit of an insight there into how we go about kind of structuring the scenario and why we include some of the questions that we do. So we'll reveal the responses, and we've gone for the remediation efforts that are fully implemented after an incident. That is a good answer. So like I said, each of these answers are lessons that the preceding events forced you to confront. And then the real life event the scenario is based on, the hack of the Altamar water plant in Florida, was caused by insecure passwords and a lack of effective segmentation of IT and OT security. Therefore, strengthening the OT security posture should be your first and biggest lesson. This is basic security hygiene. Not having this leaves you more vulnerable to criticism. So although the remediation efforts after that previous incursion are important, what we need is that basic level of security hygiene. Equally, after any security breach, a thorough investigation is essential in order to prevent the same issues from occurring again. So this remediation fully implemented, and we've got another resource in here. So again, just showing you that we kind of look at real events and we build our scenarios based on things that we're seeing happening out there in the wild in terms of security. So that is the end kind of mini run through of the new scenario. So it's live on the platform now. So if you've got access to the platform, you will be able to go and play it, to assign it to anyone in your team to play that you think it might be useful for. And hopefully we've given you a bit of insight into why we write scenarios in the way that we write them. Now I'm going to hand over to Rob to talk us through exercise summaries and the metrics. So kind of what you get out of the back end that's really interesting.
Thank you very much. Awesome facilitation. And I'm going to run through the metrics. So ultimately, I briefly touched on the fact that the reason we go through and make these sort of individual granular decisions is so that we can capture a full canopy of metrics and data that can be used to benchmark participants. It can be used to improve the quality of your scenario writing and ultimately sort of check and get an overall snapshot of the sort of crisis management awareness that you might have within your organization. So whenever you complete a scenario as an sort of an exercise event, we've ultimately got the exercise summary. So this is a nice area where we include sort of a post analysis, but also where we'll sort of cite the real world instance that that scenario is based off of. So in the case of this was based off a real world event, as Charlotte said in the beginning. We also then track scores as we run through. So with each of these options, we give them a rank from weak to great, as you've seen throughout this demonstration. And ultimately, at the end of the scenario, those scores are collated to sort of give you a snapshot of what people are scoring in that. So in the case of this, we can see that my participation, this is a version I sort of completed earlier today, I scored 65%. The scenario average was 70%. If you were to assign this exercise across a specific team or a department, you could then start to pick up where sort of areas might need improving, and this should hopefully be improved over repeat playthroughs. We can also see the participation on the right. It says under completed. Now this was set up with 1 participant, so of course there's 100% completion rate on this. But once again, you can see where everyone stands with regards to how many people are actually completing these exercises when you assign them, and out of those, you know, how many people have you assigned in the first place within that sort of deadline period that we may have set at the beginning. If we go down, we can see the average confidence score. So this is an overview of this whole exercise. And what this does is it marries our answers against our confidence in those answers. Now, there's 2 really important key learning points from this. So in the top left, the top left quadrant, we have people that have scored, people who have scored ultimately strong answers, but are not confident in those answers. And it's a bit like knowing CPR, but not having the confidence to use it. It's practically useless. So that highlights a really important area of confidence training within those participants. And in the exact opposite end, we've got the bottom right quadrant, which is a real warning sign. So this is where we're finding people that are scoring weak answers, but are very, very sure in their choices. And obviously, we don't want that when it comes to a crisis situation. So in this instance, it's more of a competency training issue. And the ideal is we're trying to progress everybody up to that top right quadrant where they know what to do in line with your industry best practices or with your organization's needs, and they are sure that they know what to do. As we scroll down, we can see areas of concern. So these are full boxes once again because it's 1 participant. But what they are showing is they are showing the most encountered injects, and then they are also showing what those results will be. So in the case of this, we can see that the first 3 injects, we've had a lot of people encountering these injects, and most of them are getting weak options on this. This might mean that that is an area worth focusing on for training. It might mean that they maybe, when you've written something, if you're creating your own scenarios, that there might be a bit of confusion, and so it's worth looking into those. Or it may just be that it's a hard inject, and that's absolutely fine. It's all based off of your organization's needs. As we scroll down, you will see that there should be sort of some individual results. But if we go back up to the top, because I'm interested in time, we can see on the left navigation. So if Charlotte goes into cat and mouse, what we can see there is this allows us to have a full rundown of the route that we took. Now, being a dynamic scenario, not everyone's experience will be exactly the same. There'll be certain injects that some people may hit or may not hit. And so what this does is it allows us to sort of get a sort of walkthrough and review of everything that we have done within that within the inject run through. So we can see that ultimately we've got our choice, we have got all the other choices and what their scores were. We can also see our confidence in those answers, and we can also see the rationale as we run through those. Just checking, yeah, I'm just aware of the interest of time, so I think that pretty much covers most of the metrics from that perspective. But like I say, if we have any questions on those afterwards, then I'll be very interested to sort of talk about that in further detail. But I'd now like to hand back to Charlotte.
Perfect. Did you want to talk about the sort of observations that you can get from?
Of course, yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's another slide as well. Yes, so what I really wanted to do, so I sort of gave you a brief overview of what the metrics look like in the platform, but what I wanted to do is just sort of explain a little bit of what that might look like when you're trying to glean the intelligence out of that. So these results are based off of 1 participant, so there are, they're standard, but when launched with a group of people, then this is when you can start getting some real intelligence that will influence your further tabletoping. So in this instance, we could see that the exercise ran asynchronously, meaning lots of different participants took place and encountered the scenario, but on their own time, globally, wherever they are. During December 2021, ex-employees were assigned to the exercise and 1 completed it. The average score across those completed exercises was 65%. 75% is considered good alignment to the expected outcomes. Though your mileage may vary, it depends on how difficult or easy you want to make the scenario based off of the topic and ultimately the team that are involved. We could see that the majority of responses, 40%, were weak and the confidence in those responses were high. So once again, we're looking at a competency training focus when it comes to these participants. We can see that 20% were not confident in selecting the strongest options. So this is where confidence training initiatives are worthwhile. And the results of this scenario could provide the benchmark for wider exercise analysis. So we could use this as a sort of an internal pilot within a sort of core team to try and see, well, what is the actual average that people are getting? And then we may want to launch the exercise to the wider organization as we run through.
Brilliant. I think over to Kieran now to run the AMA. So we've got some questions that we received before, but if you want to ask any questions, like we said, you can unmute and ask them in person or just pop them in the chat and someone will pick them up.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. And thank you, Rob and Ben as well. I think that was a brilliant run through of a great new scenario. I don't think I'll ever get tired of hearing you talk about your new scenarios. There's always something new and interesting to talk about and to exercise teams with. So that's fantastic. Before we launch into the questions, I do just want to take 10 seconds just to stop and reflect on the fact that Charlotte started there by saying, I'm going to show you how easy it is to set up a scenario, and within a few clicks we were up and running or into a scenario. And I think that for me that's a really key point. I think that this is such a complex and kind of detailed tool with lots of functionality and lots of features. It can almost be daunting as a layman to get started. But hopefully you've all seen on the call today that actually, we've got these preset scenarios for you. With a few clicks, you can be up and running, assigning that out to your team, and getting started. So that is fantastic. Again, thank you for everyone who submitted questions in advance. As Charlotte said, please continue to put them through in the chat. I've taken the liberty of summarizing some of the questions that we've had through in the weeks kind of leading up to this event. And so I'm just going to kind of ask the team one by one, if you don't mind. By and large, the most questions that we had, and the kind of hot topic if you like, is how do I, as a user, as a manager, as a team manager, create my own scenarios in this tool? And I think, Ben, that's probably best for you to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Kieran, and echo your points on kind of not getting lost in some of the complex features when the simplicity of the product is just what you've seen, as opposed to spending 6 months trying to get 8 executives in a room for a couple of hours, for example. But can I ask someone to share the screen, launch the Crisis Sim, and I'll answer this question as succinctly and briefly as I can. Thank you. So from that Crisis Sim homepage, if we click onto the Create tab there, and you'll see there's essentially 2 options to build or create your own scenario. I think the first one is, I'll show you as the second one actually, and we'll create a scenario using a template that Charlotte's just used for this. So you click on Create from Template, that takes you through to this next screen, which is a list of what's in the catalogue. You click on the one that you want to use to create your template from. And if you give the platform a couple of seconds, that will essentially drag through all the copy, all the content, all the rich media. And if Charlotte just moves across to the tree view, all the structure that is built into that existing catalogue scenario. So that's one option to create scenarios, to create from one of our, I think, 21 approximately catalogue scenarios that are now available to you. If we go back to the Create tab, thanks, Charlotte. Sorry, we went back to one too many, but if you've gone back to the left-hand side of that Preview tab, you would have worked through from top to bottom all the different boxes, the overview, thanks Charlotte, the overview, inject descriptions, and you can amend or leave as much as that as you want, depending on what your own scenario objectives are. Thanks, Charlotte. If we go back one now. The other very simple option, instead of creating from one of our templates, is to use this content builder tool to create a scenario from scratch. This hopefully is quite a self-explanatory process, where you've got a list of drop downs and boxes on the left. You've got some fields in the middle of the screen to populate, and then you've got some descriptions on the right-hand screen as to what should go in those boxes. So, very high level, we can see scenario title, industry sector. If Charlotte scrolls down a little bit more there, we get into the briefing section, we get into your inject number 1 section. And in very simple response to that first question, those are the 2 options and the 2 ways for you to build and create your own scenarios.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. On that subject, if you like, we had a number of questions around essentially getting help with that tool that you just showed us there, the kind of scenario builder, I think you called it. Unfortunately, Stuart's not been able to join us. He's stuck on a train, but he has sent me an answer to this question rather quickly. So I'll try and tick this one off for you. So essentially, if you're an existing customer of ours, and you're looking to use the Crisis Sim, and perhaps you've looked through our catalogue of scenarios, and you want to do something a bit more bespoke, you want to create something for yourself, but perhaps you don't have the expertise or the resources or even the time that the team in front of you have to create these scenarios from scratch. Essentially, there's a number of ways that we can help you here at Immersive Labs. So first and foremost, as the head of the customer success team, I'm obviously going to say, please talk to your customer success manager. I'm sure they can point you in the right direction. They'll have plenty of experience of writing or kind of facilitating scenarios with other customers. So I'm sure they'll be able to lend a hand or point you in the right direction. If, however, you're looking for more expertise, if you like, or more experience with, specifically with incident response or tabletop exercising, scenario building, etc., and then we've got a couple of additional services. So we have a number of delivery partners that we partner with who can help you. Essentially, they can provide an end-to-end service that can help you deliver crisis sim events and exercises to your specification. Alternatively, if you're looking for initial support in building customer scenarios, then we are in the process here at Immersive Labs of building out our professional services team, and they're about to launch, that team is about to launch a whole suite, a whole kind of package of add-on services in January of next year. So very shortly, we'll be able to offer you more support and more kind of add-on services, if you like, that's going to help you create and create these bespoke scenarios specifically for you and your organization and your teams. Another question that I've got around that scenario builder is quite specific, but it's a good question. Rob, is there any plans to include more kind of rich text support, such as fonts and bullet points and, maybe emojis and GIFs?
Sure, everybody wants emojis and GIFs in their crisis, just to lighten it up during the absolute mayhem. So my understanding is that, well, this sounds like something that's down the road. I can't confirm it's imminent, but I would be very surprised if it isn't. We do have this support in our lab side, and ultimately this is probably something that's on the roadmap, and ultimately as they're building out other features such as the drills, sort of formerly known as multi-role, these elements are taking the priority at the moment. There is the capability to use HTML tags within the content, so you can currently bold, italicize, and underline things with regards to using the sort of correct tags. You can also use links in the same way with the sort of like a href link tag. It's relatively simple to use. I do understand that it's a little bit more work than just pressing the bold button, but yeah, it sounds like this will be something that's coming down the line. I can't say it's coming imminently.
Fantastic, thank you, Rob. And then moving on a little bit away from the scenario builder, maybe one for Charlotte. How would a user, a manager looking to facilitate one of these presentations go about choosing the scenario that's best for their organization?
Yeah, so we've got basically the way we kind of name our scenarios, so the naming conventions. I'll just do create from templates so we can see them all. Does try to help it, make it easier for that. So You can see if it's ransomware, you can see what kind of sector it is. We've also got the catalogue, which we've created, which gives you detail about each of the scenarios, which will be, I think, shared with customers imminently. So it's, again, it will give you the name and the kind of what is in the scenario, and you can filter it by that. We've also just started to add metadata to scenarios. So the idea is that imminently, so probably in the new year, you'll be able to search via that metadata. So by industry, by attack vector, and then that will help you kind of narrow down what you want to see and what you want to present to your organization. So yeah, I'd say to pick the correct one, think about what kind of vectors are most affecting your industry, or what kind of vectors you want to test your employees on, and then also I guess what industry you're in and whether we've got a scenario that fits that, which we do try to have for most of our customer base.
Brilliant. Thanks, Charlotte. And as I mentioned earlier, I always think the topics that we cover in our scenarios are fascinating. But Ben, how do you choose the topics that you cover?
From a catalogue perspective ourselves, Kieran?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so we've particularly in the past 12 months, I guess we try to do two things. We try and look at actual events as they're unfolding and build scenarios around those as quickly as we possibly can, using all the available intelligence to us, both kind of what's online and what our own cyber teams, our own lab technicians and lab designers are working from. But I think the other thing that's important that we're also trying to do within my team, obviously, which Rob and Charlotte are part, is we're trying to forecast what the next big kind of cyber crisis might be as well. So we're trying to kind of get ahead of the game in that regard as well. But I think we have to be careful on that front, and our aim is always that whatever we're building in terms or developing in terms of a scenario, if it hasn't yet occurred, it needs to be plausible to occur, not just possible, but plausible to occur. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, thank you. And along a similar line, I suppose, again, Ben, one for you. What would you say is different about the way that we write our scenarios compared to, your experience with other tools or ways of doing things?
So I think the main thing with the crisis sim, I think if it's not already apparent, when you start a crisis simulation in the crisis simulator platform, you don't know how it's going to end. And that's the key differentiator here. It is really choose your own adventure. The answers and the decisions that are made during the scenario will impact the following injects, and they'll also impact the end of the scenario. So I think that's completely different from almost any other format I've seen, which is essentially a pre-contrived set of questions, regardless of the answers to which the result of the scenario or the result of the PowerPoint in most cases will ultimately be exactly as it was intended to be and planned from the start. And that's very different from what we're offering.
Fantastic, thank you. We've had a few questions come in while we've been talking, which is great. Thank you very much to everyone in the audience who's posed some questions. So I'll throw these ones out and please help me out with some of the answers here, team. But I'll probably take the first one. So when Charlotte was presenting, you briefly hovered over a tile that said drills, and someone in the audience has asked, are drill options available just to super users and administrators, because they don't see that in their platform? Now, feel free to jump in or correct me if I'm wrong, but actually, as far as I'm aware, while we've been on this particular webinar, we've had an internal call to kind of begin launching drills. So that is a new part of the tool, part of the platform that's coming very soon. So don't be too shocked that you don't have it in your platform right at this moment. I think essentially all it goes to show is just the speed at which we're developing this, and drills, I think, I personally think is a really exciting update to what we have to offer, and it will be released shortly. So you've just had a bit of a sneak peek this afternoon at what's to come. Would anybody else like to add anything else to that answer?
Only to echo that it's absolutely correct, Kieran. I think obviously a product team was separate from us, but a couple of weeks I would say is a reasonable timescale to expect. And just to clarify, I think there's been a few questions about drills and multi-roles. Same thing, essentially what a drill will allow you to do is we've just played this scenario as one team, one kind of incident or crisis response team. What the drill functionality will enable you to do is assign injects to specific roles within that team, as opposed to us all answering those questions together. It's the simplest explanation, but yeah, other than that, Kieran, from my side, nothing to it.
Perfect, spot on. And you've actually slightly anticipated the next question that's come in, which is quite simply, will there be an update to create multiple roles within a custom simulation?
Yeah, I think that's what we said, yeah.
Yeah, ultimately, I can answer that when that feature comes out. I'm not sure. I can't confirm whether that will come out on the launch when it's publicly available. It may just be the initial launch, may just be our catalog sims to start with. But yes, it will ultimately be a relatively simple sort of adjustment. If you're accustomed to the builder, it really is just assigning some roles as so we create a role right at the beginning, but it will just be creating multiples of those roles. And on every single inject, there's just an extra drop-down field of those roles that you've created for that scenario that you just select for that specific inject. And what that means is that that inject will only be seen and sort of interacted with by the participant that you choose to play that role when you set up the exercise. So it's a really exciting feature, and it's actually relatively, it's not really much more work to sort of implement on a multi-role level from the platform side.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. Thank you for the clarification. So the next question, it's a licensing question, which I know that me and my team in particular get involved in quite a lot. So perhaps I'll try and answer this one. Will there be the possibility to manage users access between CyberPro and Crisis Sim, as well as users who have Crisis Sim access being able to modify their permissions to create, present, single player, user, etc.? So I think the answer to this one ultimately is if you've currently got one license type and you have access to within your organization, you've purchased access to CyberPro and Crisis Sim, for example, please just speak to your customer success manager, and they can help you make sure the right licenses are in the right hands at this point. As Charlotte alluded to in her demo, we're going to start more and more kind of seeding labs into the crisis simulations as well. So you'll start to see more synergy between the CyberPro product and the Crisis Sim product, which will be a incredible update. I'm sure you can all agree. The idea of kind of working through a scenario and then sending off, relevant people to go and complete relevant labs is going to be really powerful stuff. In the background, there's lots of improvements going on to our license management functionality, which will be coming and we'll be putting into the hands of our managers as soon as we can. But ultimately, in the meantime, speak to your customer success manager and they'll be able to kind of assign and reassign licenses as necessary.
Yeah, and just to touch on the lab aspect, so the scenario that I showed you, the full version does have a lab in, which will appear at the beginning of the first inject. Not playing it doesn't mean you can't play the scenario. So if you don't have the lab access, you can still play the scenario. It's just augments the experience and really enhances the learning, I would say, like makes the soft skill learning come more alive.
Brilliant. Thank you, Charlotte. Next question, hopefully a fairly simple one, although I must admit I don't know the answer. So yeah, hopefully someone can help me out with this one. Once an exercise is published, can the administrator go back and edit the exercise, for example, if they put a typo in accidentally or they forgot to put that GIF in?
I can tell you this one. So it's a great question because ultimately we have a bunch of tools that are used to try and prevent that typo potentially getting out into the wide world. But the short answer to that is yes. So whenever you publish a scenario, that scenario is available within your internal catalog. And as we've sort of seen earlier, whenever you want to make amends or adjustments to that scenario, maybe you want to use it for a completely different event and change the name of the bank that you're running, ultimately you can go into the builder, you can bring it in from template, so you can create from template and make adjustments in that sense. There is, once a scenario is published once a scenario is published, you can't make amends directly to the scenario that you've created, and that's for a data integrity point of view, so that once people have played through it, we can't actually allow that to sort of amend it, otherwise you may lose the data that you've captured. So in that instance, you always can just go and take the scenario that you previously made and ultimately change it there. Another element that is worth sort of noting is when you're creating these scenarios, you know, there is the option to preview that scenario, and it's a really good opportunity to actually spend a good amount. Once you think you're done before you publish it, you can always play through it, and there's the option to preview, which allows you to go through. It allows you to sort of just check everything, sense check it's all right. It also allows you to step back, which none of the live published scenarios that you do. So if you wanted to say explore option A and see where that goes, and then you can just start routing your way backwards through the scenario back to where you were, and then be like, well, what would it look like if we did option B? So yeah, there are a bunch of tools which allow you to try and avoid that situation. But yes, the answer is yes, you can.
Brilliant, thank you, Rob. And perhaps a similar question or along similar lines. Once you've run an exercise, can you run it again? Yeah, without having to kind of template and republish it.
I'm happy to take this one again. So the element with that, so it's an important distinction between a scenario and an exercise, is that the scenario is the sort of game you play. It's the actual built, the one with the tree view, the one with all the content. The scenario is the thing you use to create an exercise. And the exercise is a one-off instance where you're going to be either going through presentation, drills, or single player, and you'll assign that exercise to a group of people. And that is so that you can sort of capture those metrics within that group and make sure that only the people you want are going to be participating. So when it comes to running an exercise for an event, you will have to create a new exercise for the next event. And that's so that you can keep the metrics within that instance. But if the question is like, do I have to remake the scenario? The answer is no. Ultimately, it is as simple as Charlotte showed earlier today. Setting up a new exercise is ultimately just a few button clicks, find the scenario that you're looking to run, and you're ready to go.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've just had one more question come in, which I think we might have answered, or perhaps I asked the wrong question earlier. So I think I asked earlier if we're going to support kind of rich text and bullet points, etc. There's another question here, you know, are we considering HTML, supporting HTML editors to, oh, okay, it is a different question, for the actual kind of customization of inject, so it seems.
It's not something that I'm aware of in the pipeline when it comes to if it's specifically HTML editor for the actual presentation of the whole sort of scenario. For example, like background color, it's definitely something that has been requested previously. I don't know how high that is on sort of sprint roadmaps right now. But yeah, like I say, it's something that I think it is down the road, but once again, I can't say it's imminent right now. I think that there are a few sort of things that are trying to figure out beforehand, and then once they're sort of adapted, and in all honesty, once like the once things build up with consultancy elements, it is something that has been requested a couple of times. Can we put our logo here? Can we do this? Like, can we sort of change some things there? I think the more and more this question gets asked, the more likely that thing gets pushed up the roadmap. So it's a great question, and definitely something that as authors, I'm sure Charlotte and Ben would absolutely love to see. So yeah.
Yeah, and on that note, essentially, your customer success manager will always be, your voice into Immersive Labs, if you like. So if you have feedback, requests for features or any kind of tweaks or, suggestions that you'd like to get, through to the product team, I'd encourage you, always to speak to your CSM, and they can go and kind of champion those causes for you internally, and we'll do so, believe me. On a similar note, really, you know, thank you for all those questions. I understand that putting them in the chat box, you know, perhaps we've not interpreted them completely correctly. So if there's you know, a question that you've asked and perhaps you've not quite got the answer that you want, again, please speak to your CSM. And if there's any questions that we've missed as well in the chat box, then don't worry, we have a full kind of account of all of that, and we will follow up on all of those questions if we've missed any. And likewise, we'll be sending the recording of this session around very shortly. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time. To the audience, thank you to the team for joining me today. And I hope that everybody found it valuable. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.